Hey everybody, here for another Bible study. We're getting now into, oops, I haven't changed the text on my front here. It's Genesis 4, 1 to 16. We're going to get into Cain and Abel. Let us remind ourselves before we get into this, though the genre changes a little bit in the sense of we're no longer in a garden or the 7 days, so we're not in the direct creation narratives anymore. We're definitely within the ancient world of creation mythology. Whenever you use the word mythology, remind yourself that doesn't mean untrue. It means it's trying to tell us a lot more than perhaps just like a newspaper rendering of, say, a historical event. So again, myths can be untrue, right? Like we can think of the Greek myths, but not all myths were meant to be seen as untrue, but rather they often had more going on than just a wooden reading would give us. So we're still in this world building. We're outside the garden now, but we still are dealing with the same situation that was in the garden. And we want to be careful that we keep our eyes open for those same kind of trends that we saw earlier in the Genesis story. You're going to start seeing things that are going to stand out, that are important to the writer. So let's get right into it. You guys have all heard this story. Now, Adam knew Eve, which means he had relations with her. That's the new in the old sense of knowing someone. He bedded her, or whatever else other term you want to use, his wife. And that's important. You got this wife. You got this covenantal marriage right at the beginning. It's this is not a new thing or a modern concept, as much as the modern critic feminists would want us to think. And she conceived and bore Cain, saying, and Cain's name is an interesting name in the sense of it has to do with kind of taking on for yourself authority. And it certainly says that when it's saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. Right away, we should be aware. What's been the problem in chapter 3? We've got the primordial couple coming in, and they are tempted by being like God. Well, now she's acting at a divine sense of divine element in herself. She has created man, and it's the Lord that's the helper. You have this sense already of divine agency she's placing on herself, and right away we should think, oh boy, here we go, because we know what's you inherit with that temptation is death and destruction, and that's what we're going to find with our friend Cain. And again, she bore his brother Abel. Abel's interesting because his name means breath. So we've got, and of course that will be his lifespan. Abel, of course, will become the hero. He's the one that is not born out of the self-proclaimed divine agency. That's very important. And it's a recognition of the frailty of humanity, but when he calls his name breath. Now, Abel was the keeper of sheep, and Cain was the worker of the ground. That, again, we have this reality that there's two different, but there's no meant to be judgment here. It's not like a shepherd is better than a worker of the ground. This is just letting us know what they do for a living. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground. Now, there's a lot of debate why this wasn't as good, and I can tell you what I've heard and read, and there's not a uniform view on it. And Abel also brought the firstborn of his flock and their fat portions. So some people say that the fruit of the ground is not as good, or that maybe Cain didn't bring the best. And that what we want to notice it with Abel is he brings the firstborn of his flock, which would be the best, and he brings the fat portions. There's a lot of debate. There's problems with all of these claims, especially if you take in the sacrificial system of the Torah, which does not discount grain offerings. And does not overemphasize fat offerings or that. I think whatever we're going to take out of it, and maybe right, maybe it is that it was the first fruits, it was the best. Whatever thing that the writer wants, at least he wants to show that the intent of Abel was to give of something sacrificial, and Abel was not giving the same level and walking in the same faith. Of course, that's where Hebrews takes us in chapter 12, when it talks about Abel being a symbol of faith because of his giving. So, and the Lord had regard to Abel and his offering. So he took that and said, now remember, our God is an interesting God. He's working through their system. He's compromising to their world, but he's not a God that needs. All other sacrificial system, the gods needed the food for themselves. He gives regard to the sacrifice, but this is not a God who needs the sacrifice. So what's important here, folks, is not the sacrifice itself. And I think that's why we should avoid getting too caught up in that. The important thing is the intent of the giver. And boy, is that important for when we give ourselves to the Lord. It's not even the gift, it's the intent. Is it out of faith? Is it out of worship? Or is it out of duty or some other thing, which the Bible does not celebrate? All right, God loves a cheerful giver, right? All right. But for Cain and his offering, he had no regard. In other words, whatever he's doing, the intent of the offering is not good. So Cain was very angry. Now, what's interesting here is we've got, just to go back a little bit, you've got God interacting with humanity outside the garden. So he has not stopped fully his presence. There's definitely less. The garden was his full presence walking in the cool of the day, but he's still engaging. This is a God who still wants relationship, which encourages me because it shows that this God's going to go, and of course we know that all the way to the cross to maintain that relationship. But even under judgment, he's going to continue to try and work through mercy. Cain was very angry. His face fell. And the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry and why has your face fallen? So he sees this. And why does he ask these questions? It's that old thing why, I think of Jesus when Peter walks on the water and then sinks. He asks him, why did you sink? And what you have little faith, he says. He's not asking because he needs to know. He's asking to get him to think about it. Cain, what's really going on? Why are you angry with Abel when you're the one who's not walking? It's the old parent thing that you're trying to tell your kids, why are you doing this? Trying to get them to see it for themselves. And, in Peter's case, it's because he was trying to be like God by walking on the water. And in this, and a faulty view, that's why his faith was wrong. And of course, in this case, Cain is seriously angry, but he's not owning it himself. He's angry because he didn't get acknowledged. All right. If you do well, will you not be accepted? So now the question is, is a call for repentance right away in this, he's hoping. And if you not do well, and then he presents sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. So now we have sin presented in a certain word that's very interesting, crouching at the door. So they used to believe in antiquity, especially in the Mesopotamian basin, that there were what were called door demons, and they would crouch. And sometimes they thought they were animals, but sometimes they thought they were spiritual beings, and they would come and do damage to the family. And these door demons would crouch and attack you. So he's likening it to that. He's not, but he's creating sin as an adversary, sin as this evil that wants to come and destroy us. How unfortunate it is, and I could go on for a long time on this, that we see sin or God's opposition to things we do that he opposes as him being a party pooper or somehow against us, when that very things we're doing are destroying us. And I can mention so many ways, but just look at what the sexual revolution has done. Everyone's, we're free, we're liberated. Look at the quality of humanity. Look at the death that's come because of it. Look at the destruction of human beings. It's not been a liberation at all. So its desire is to be contrary to you, but you must rule over it. In other words, you have to make a choice to defeat it. This is a battle between man and his desires that are contrary. So there's a force in this world, according to the Genesis writer, that wants to destroy us. And it wants to allure us, and it uses things like our jealousy, our anger, and instead of us looking at ourselves to conquer it, we let it take us over. And of course, unfortunately, our good friend Cain will do that. Cain spoke to Abel, his brother, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel, and he killed him. There you go. So you get your first murder. You've got motive and opportunity and death. Isn't that what they always say in those true crime? That you need motive and opportunity. Motive is jealousy, and opportunity is he pulls him out into the field, and he kills him. When the Lord said to Cain, where is Abel, your brother? It's interesting that the Lord comes in and asks questions. I think he already knows. When he's in the garden, where are you guys? Who told you to hide? He's trying to get the truth out, but Cain's going to lie. He says, I do not know. This is an interesting use of words, because in the same language of you can be like God, knowing good from evil. By giving into that, they have now shown that they actually don't know. They don't know how to navigate good and evil. And Cain is an example that I do not know. He's speaking actually the truth. He doesn't understand good and evil. He doesn't understand this stuff because he wasn't ready for it, and Adam and Eve were not ready for it. And now we're seeing the fruit of the garden, exactly what you predicted, death. Death is now their new world. This is their... and then he asks, am I my brother's keeper? Of course, this will become a long-term concept in Judaism, and I'm sure we could talk about it today. How the question is, why should I be worried about my neighbor? You see this self-centeredness, this wanting to be divine in and of himself. There's a sense right away that it's about Cain, and he doesn't need to worry about the person next to him. And of course, that will become a big part of Jesus' ministry, is to highlight that those first century Second Temple Jews were thinking a lot like Cain. They were worried about themselves and their agenda and their world, and of course, they weren't going to worry about their neighbor when you're in that spot. And the Lord said, what have you done? And you've got this sense of this shock that he has decided to do this. The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the ground. So now we have the first cursed human. But the first cursed human is because of an action. It isn't just because they ate the apple. They were not cursed there. There was a result of that. They were going to be a gender conflict. We talked about this last week. But now we actually have a curse. Now he has become it, and he's become like the curse of the ground. So he's become less than what he was ideally meant to be. He's losing his humanity, as it were. Like just as the ground was cursed and not able to give the fruit it was once meant to, Cain is now cursed. He's now lost the presence of God and ability to be what it means to be human, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from my hands. So we have this cursed ground, and we now have cursed Cain, and boy, it doesn't look good for him, does it? When you work the ground, it shall no longer yield you its strength. So it's even going to be worse than being outside the garden. It's even going to get worse. Every sin just moves us further and further away from God. First, they're kicked out of the garden. Now he's going to be actually kicked out of the presence of God, out into the wilderness. So if you take the temple, the Holy of Holies was seen as the garden, and then the temple court would have been probably seen where Adam and Eve were first sent out. But this guy's being kicked right out of the temple. He's being right out of the community. So you get your first example of exile here, which was the ultimate punishment in the ancient world, much worse than death, because you now were living without love and protection and community. You shall be a fugitive and wander the earth. So now he's going to be walking around without community, without love, without life. And isn't that what sin does to us? Cain says to the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. All right, so this is him even though he deserves it, he's asking for mercy. Behold, you've driven me away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. So it's always in the Old Testament, the concern is not first sin. Sin is a fruit of their actions, but their number one concern is not being in the presence of God. We need to bring that back more into New Testament theology, rather than making sin the main thing. Sin is awful evil. We need to turn, but we need to turn from it because it takes us from his presence. And all through the Old Testament, exile is the worst thing. And exile for us as human beings is when we go our own way. And we should grieve those who don't believe in Jesus Christ, grieve those who live in their sin, because they are choosing to be outside of the grace and the love of God. And it's heartbreaking. We should be preaching and praying that they come back in. Anyways, I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer in the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. Now, here we got a big issue. If you're a person who holds that Adam and Eve were the first people that ever had human children, well, who are these people that are going to kill him? Who are these people that are going to harass him? Where do they come from? Highly unlikely that it's because Adam and Eve had other children and they're somehow way out in the wilderness living now. What I'm trying to say to you is there's no sense that you have to read the New Testament creation story as if they're the first people that ever had human children. Now you're going to say, well, Eve was called the originator of life, or the beginner of this new life. Now, we have to be careful how that language is used. So in the Genesis account, there's another guy who's named who says he's the beginner or the originator of people who lived in tents or worked on tents. That doesn't mean he's the first person that ever had a tent, but he became the kind of the prototype of this type of living lifestyle. She's the prototype of this new living. She's the prototype of this new world where they've been kicked out of the garden. She becomes the prototype. It doesn't mean there aren't human beings around in that time. And clearly the Genesis account writer doesn't seem to see this as a problem at all, that there's other people around. So I don't think we should read into it what is not there. So there's a real threat to people outside this garden, outside in the wilderness, that are going to do them damage. And I think the main point is that when you get outside of the grace of God, I think this is more important of a question, is you end up going amongst the world of darkness, of destruction, and of chaos. The more you walk out, and you ask people who have walked away from the Lord, and they will tell you very much in their testimonies who've come back, that living out in the world is not a nice place. It's dangerous, it's destructive, and it was out to get you. So whoever finds me will kill me. And then the Lord said to him, not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken upon him. So, sevenfold. Now this is interesting because according to Genesis itself, if you take somebody's life, you should be killed. And in Genesis 9, you can look that up. I think it's 5 and 6. And even in the Torah says that the right thing is to. So God is already having mercy on him. Isn't that amazing? He's not giving him what he deserves. The other thing is that in the Old Testament, if somebody was killed, your family member could come and have retribution. In this case, God would have retribution on Cain, so he's still, in a way, putting him under the umbrella of God's protection as a family member. It is an amazing level of grace read in the context of this, which shows us the God that's going to show mercy. And the Lord put a mark on Cain. No one knows what that is. The funny thing is the Mormon teaching traditionally has been that the mark of Cain was to be black, and that you could be set free of this mark if you went off to be in heaven with your perpetually pregnant wife. Anyways, we're not going to teach Roman theology, which is insane. What I'm trying to say is that people have tried to apply this mark in many different ways historically. It's just a mark. We don't know what it means. Lest any you found him should attack him. So we've got this threat from people around. All right. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. He's gone out into the wilderness, and he's got his new place to live. So let's get into the questions. Oh, there we go. Well, I think to have lost something here, but hopefully this is still recording. Anyways. Sin is portrayed as a threatening door demon or evil animal out to consume humanity. It says, what about why God is so serious in regards to humanity's engagement in it? What does this story tell us about the consequences of sin? Okay. Number 2, by not taking Cain's life as a judgment of the murderer, as Genesis says, is rightful justice. What does this say about the character of God? What does the fact he makes a mark on him to protect him say about the character of God right from the beginning, and that we see through the life of Jesus Christ? All right. Here's the quote from Genesis 9, just so you know. And for your lifeblood I will require reckoning from every beast. I will require it, and from man, from his fellow man, I will require a reckoning for the man of life. So the fact that he does not do that, it says something about God's character. We should consider right from the beginning that he does not give him what he wants. Well, here you go. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by God, man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his image. So that's out of Genesis. So he's not giving him what he deserves. Number 3, the consequences of sin is more separation for humanity from each other. First outside the garden, second to the utter wilderness. How does Jesus' sacrifice deal with this separation, and how is this essential for our salvation? So that's an important question. There's more going on than just the forgiveness of sins, and I think that's what I would talk about, is just what does it truly mean to be saved and what God is doing amongst us. All right. I hope everyone has a great day, and we'll see you later.